All right, welcome back for another episode of the Greenwich Consulting Application Accelerator webinar series. My name is Dr. Tom Galarraga. I am the Director of Product Integration here at Greenwich Consulting. And today I am very pleased to have a very special guest with us, Tyler. He is our subject matter expertise and lead content developer for manufacturing and infusion. Tyler, can you go ahead and go ahead and introduce yourself and give us a little bit about background about you? Tell us who you are.
Sure. Thank you, Tom. So yeah, my name is Tyler Brandenburg. I'm a subject matter expert for Greenrush Consulting based out of course, Oakland, California. And my subject matter expert area is manufacturing and laboratory processes and extraction as well, because that's usually what we're talking about with infused products and manufacturing in general. And my background is 10 years in the renewable energy and biodiesel industry, refining oils and also distillation of volatile solvents and volatile fluids under vacuum and atmospheric pressure. And so a lot of this manufacturing information applies directly towards the cannabis industry with distillation and refinement of cannabis oil. And then further, I have a good bit of supervision, production experience with food safety plans and food processing. So when it comes to cannabis infused products, having a food safety plan in place really helps you comply with your local regulations and whatnot. And then I have a good bit of laboratory experience too. So many ASTM methods in a laboratory environment under ISO validation criteria. So not to take up too much more time with my bio, but that's my experience professionally. And then of course, with cannabis as well, affiliated with medical farms in Southern Oregon, and I went to school at Humboldt State. So I'm fluent in many of the nomenclature and vocabulary and processes with cannabis.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you very much for that introduction. So for those of us that aren't already master infusers or master manufacturers, what Tyler's kind of getting at is a lot of the practices and the methods that we have to do for the extraction process, they're not necessarily unique to cannabis. A lot of the laws, a lot of the standards, a lot of the certification processes, they exist from existing industries, right? One industry we can think of is the essential oils industry. Extracting essential oils is very similar to what we're doing, and they already have standards and practices. So what we like to do is when we're building a competitive application, we want to demonstrate to all reviewers that we know the process and we know every process that is involved. So what Tyler will be talking about today is what we call best management practices. So he will be discussing how to handle raw materials per se, or how to sanitize equipment. All of the standards that you need to have implemented at your facility, Tyler's gonna go ahead and start breaking down today. And the thing we need to kind of take away from is that not all of these are going to be cannabis specific. Tyler already mentioned the ATSM, correct, Tyler?
Yes, ASTM International, correct. That's one certification and subcommittee that's being formed to standardize a lot of different practices, which we'll get into.
Absolutely. And so before we go ahead and jump in, please keep in mind that a lot of the information, a lot of the best practices, we are pulling from best management practices from other industries. Why do we do this? Well, sometimes the state hasn't kind of promulgated or let us know what they want. They just say, do it in accordance with national standards. So it's on us to demonstrate that we know those national standards, our SOPs and all of our protocol and everything we do at the facility is going to match those already existing standards, as well as the cannabis specific ordinances and regulations that we have to adhere to. So Tyler, go ahead and kind of break it down a little bit more for us. Where do we start? Where do we begin? What's the first thing we need to consider when we're kind of jumping into best management practices?
Great. So the first thing that I've prepared for this afternoon's discussion is just to keep it very simple, to start off with what is the difference between the phrase current good manufacturing practices and just good manufacturing practices. Because if you're starting a cannabis business and trying to get one of these competitive licenses, whether it's cultivation, dispensary, or infused products, you have a lot on your plate, and so there's a lot of different phrases and terms being thrown around as you go to these different conferences. Different buzzwords come up, and sure enough, good manufacturing practices is coming up quite often now as we want to, solidify and establish a quality platform for our infusion and manufacturing processes. So I have a few notes here I'll be looking at along the way. So if I look away from the screen, that'll be for that. And so the difference between current good manufacturing practices and good manufacturing practices is simply that the FDA created this term current good manufacturing practices because they wanted to make a distinction between any old good manufacturing practices. So an example could be if you're operating your essential oil extraction company with the good manufacturing practices of a meat packing plant from 1950s, that's not going to cut it. So the FDA kind of caught on to this, and they wanted to distinguish the fact that current good manufacturing practices means you have in place policies and procedures that are compliant with our current rules and legislation. So just as you're learning how to run your business and adopt these best management practices, the first thing, just identify the nomenclature. So current good manufacturing practices means you're compliant with a specific set of good manufacturing practices from a certain set of rules. And so that's the first thing I just want to clarify as, our first remedial prompt here. And then Dr. Tom might relay some of this stuff back to the infusion plan for the Illinois application as an example with some of these best management practices. So did you want to step in and add anything at this time?
Absolutely. Really quick, Tyler, before we kind of jump into the actual application itself, can you kind of give us a brief run through of some of these agencies that create these standards? Like what are some of the entities that we should be looking for? You obviously mentioned ASTM. What other regulatory bodies should we be paying attention to for manufacturing and infusion?
Yeah. Right. So first and foremost, obviously, follow your local laws and rules that are established. A lot of times these mimic federal good manufacturing practices that the FDA has set out. If not, the language is really, really close. So for instance, Illinois, it's obviously going to be the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act and the emergency rules set forth by the Illinois Department of Agriculture. In other states, it's going to be the similar analog for that state. So that's your first regulatory body. And then we look towards the FDA and the federal body for some of the Title 21, Code of Federal Regulations, Title 21. There's various parts that we're going to look at today really closely, really just simply close first look at some of the terms associated with these different parts of Title 21. And what this does is it's just going to make you compliant in most cases if you're following in policies and procedures that are in line with this. And then finally, there's the Food Safety Modernization Act, and not to throw too many terms and acronyms out, we call it FSMA. That's a follow-up for certain products and for certain facilities to be compliant with the FDA Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act. And so we'll get into that a little bit more too. Again, we just want to have a little baseline structure of some of these best management practices. So you have those federal standards. Then we have international best management practices from organizations like ASTM International and ISO, which we'll get into and explain a little bit further. And to bring it full circle, the exciting thing about ISO and ASTM is we are seeing cannabis-specific standards that are adopted now by these organizations that the cannabis standard industry can look to now for their own specific best management practices.
Awesome. Thank you, Tyler. And so kind of just circling back really quick to the actual application process, it's important to understand these entities because as part of the application, more specifically as part of Exhibit D, the infusing plan, one of the things you want to do is demonstrate your knowledge of all the methods that you'll be using. So it's not just knowledge of, hey, I can actually operate these machines, but you want to demonstrate that you can operate these machines in absolute and full compliance, right? Now, in the infusion plan, there's a third question, and what they're basically asking for is, how are you going to demonstrate to us that you can manufacture and infuse safe products? Now, it's not just safe in terms of security. What we're talking is quality control here, right? Make sure there's no adulterants, contaminants, any pesticides or any chemicals or anything that shouldn't be getting to the products, making sure that they're not getting in there. And this is done by adopting best management practices. These are what they're for. They're intended to protect the consumer, make sure that at all times, whatever the consumer is ingesting or consuming, it is safe, that it's been produced by a certain standard. It can be recalled, it can be tracked, and it can be monitored. And so all of this, you want to go ahead, when you're telling your story for Exhibit D, your infuser plan, you want to tell the story demonstrating that you not only know how to use your equipment, but you know all of the safety issues that you might be dealing with. You know all of the compliance issues you might be dealing with, all of the sanitation standards you want to have dealt with, and even an inventory control process and quality control process, including recall measures, right? This is how you demonstrate your ability to produce a safe and effective infused product, at least for Exhibit D for your infuser plan. Tyler, go ahead.
Yeah, very good. So to answer the question first, we'll just refer back to the prompt showing basically that you have the experience and the policies and procedures to see through product planning and implementation of manufacturing consumer product goods with a recall plan. And the Illinois regulations, point to all these plans that you're supposed to have in place, but they don't necessarily say how you're going to do it. So the way that you do it is through the best management practices that we're going to talk about today that come from the standards that I mentioned and precedent from the Food and Drug Cosmetic Act, Title 21. So the way that you establish a really redundant process of traceability is what we're talking about here, really is what it comes down to, is through all parts of the process. So the best management practices and the good manufacturing practices really start with high-level typical things that you would associate with any facility, and that is the premises. That are they kept free of debris? Is there a perimeter with barrier? Is there vermin control? What are the neighboring parking lots like? Is there standing water? So you're establishing contracts with vermin control, landscaping companies, and you're keeping all the records. That's the main perimeter stuff, and those types of things. You're showing that the vermin control person is coming in weekly or monthly, whatever it is, to check on these things, and it's mundane, boring stuff, but these are the things that establish really traceability from the very beginning of the premises. So you're establishing that you have the correct water supply, the correct plumbing, the correct toilet facilities, the correct lighting in all the manufacturing areas. And all of this is a redundant theme in Title 21 of the Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act, and also a redundant theme also in the Illinois regulations. These simple things of, keeping the premises, building the premises, constructing the premises, basically sufficient for the means by which it's supposed to manufacture something. So that's the baseline thing, common sense kind of stuff. Then we move in towards designing the product and getting into quality control. And establishing that you're going to be able to produce these products with, small risk to the health of the consumers involved with the product. And lo and behold, there's phrases and best management practices throughout these same regulations that I've talked about that you won't find in the Illinois regulations. And that's where you start to bring up your manufacturing, your master manufacturing protocol. And this should be a big best management practices across all different types of manufacturing processes. And you're going to establish basically all the ingredients, all the theoretical yields that you're expected to get after the manufacturing process goes so that you can monitor the process. You know when something is awry. You know when there's a problem that needs to be corrected because the theoretical yield is off versus your actual yield. These are all aspects of your master manufacturing protocol that you're going to make for every single product. And specifically with Illinois and the application, you have to register every single product with the Department of Agriculture. And so you want to have a profile from the very beginning, documenting what that product is, the specific weights of all the ingredients, the raw components, and then we establish another best management practice of getting another layer of traceability where you are documenting the process lots of all the raw ingredients that go into your product. You're documenting and establishing approved supplier verification program, and that ties into the Food Safety Modernization Act, which is another standard in best management practice that separates itself from Title 21 and updates a few things. And again, this gets back to answering the question of establishing the authority, showing you have the experience. So you're going to associate yourself with employees that have this type of experience. And the main thing I wanted to talk about with the Food Safety Modernization Act that is different from Title 21, that is a best management practice that can be adopted, is a hazard analysis risk-based preventative control system. In Title 21, you'll see hazard analysis critical control points. And there's a subtle difference between these, and that's what FSMA really does, is it updates this good management, good manufacturing practice with this different language where you're going to assess basically all the threats to your product at each phase and step of the manufacturing process. And you're going to document this. And as people that are starting businesses and don't know about these different terms and these different systems, there's things to help you. There's templates out there for hazard analysis, risk-based preventative control surveys, where you go through and you break up your phases of your production process, and you look at the mechanical, the biological, mechanical is kind of physical hazards, biological hazards, and blood-borne pathogens, things like that. And you literally document your corrective action to prevent those things from happening. So Dr. Tom, help keep me on task here. And the question was a loaded question. So we're at establishing quality for the product, right? And showing how we're going to create traceability through the manufacturing process. Next, we want to talk about kind of equipment and how you're going to manufacture different products and ensure the safety of them. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Thank you, Tyler. So before we kind of jump into that a little bit, can you elaborate a little bit more on some of the more basic phases of production? I know some of us maybe haven't actually gone through the process yet, and we're looking to become entrepreneur new people in manufacturing. So can you kind of just give us a little bit of things to look out for? What are the basic steps of processing? What do we absolutely need to describe as we're putting together our infusing plan? In other words, what do we need to write about in our application? I know there's probably each product relies on its own set of steps, but is there kind of a basic rundown of the general steps, prep, phasing, production phase, packaging, anything that you kind of point us to so we know what to include specifically and where we can maybe strengthen our process?
Sure. Well, you're definitely going to want to mention your sanitary practices. You're going to, your sanitation and sanitary practices with individual hygiene of the agents involved at the facility, the training that they're going to receive, whether it's a food handlers training that's in line with, your local government, depending on what state you're in. And then you're going to want to talk about how you're going to secure your raw ingredients and how you're going to make changes to those ingredients, and definitely develop a strategy for how you're going to ensure that the product has the purity, strength, and of what it says it is on the packages. So however you're labeling it, you want to make sure that the product has the identity, purity, and strength that it's made to represent. And this thing is like easier said than done. But when you think about cannabis distillate as one of your raw products with, say, infusing and infused cannabis infused products, most people are using raw distillate to get these your master manufacturing protocol stable so that you can make a consistent product. So we know all batches of cannabis flower are all, you know, different, and so we struggle to get a consistent product from flower. So a lot of people are using obviously concentrates. So that gets back to, you know, describing your processes that you're going to use to create these products. You're going to create partnerships with, in Illinois, it's going to be cultivation centers, craft growers to receive these raw products. And you're going to want to talk about corrective actions and show your contingency plans for when you receive product from your approved supplier and it doesn't meet your quality agreement and your specifications. You had it internally tested, or you tested it and it came up with residual solvent or something. How are you going to respond to that? Those types of things. So that'll make your content stronger when you you know, reply to some of these prompts in the application.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tyler. You kind of talked about getting a little bit more into the processes required to produce specific products. You want to go ahead and jump right into that? Maybe walk us through what it's required to kind of, yeah, walk us through kind of the process from raw material to final product. You can go ahead and pick the product. And then more specifically, what I'm kind of curious to know about is what types of equipment will we need to produce the variety of cannabis infused products do we need? I mean, I imagine there's equipment. Can you walk us through that a little bit? Help us maybe narrow down. Well, for someone like me, my difficulty, my problem would be selecting the products. I know this should be based off of what equipment I want. So I don't have that information. Could you kind of help enlighten me with that? Kind of demonstrate the relationship?
Yeah. The most important thing is to keep, of course, the Illinois specific criteria. If we're going to, you know, keep it to Illinois, understand that infusers as of now cannot do extractions and create cannabis concentrates. So the extraction is left to the cultivation centers. The infusers, I believe in the Illinois CRTA, they're going to assess the process after a few years, take a survey of if infusers have enough raw component, meaning basically distillate or a concentrate, to create these infused products. So you have to definitely know which license type you're applying for and make sure you have the right products in mind. So if we're talking infusing cannabis infused products, infusers license, we're going to be considering more things, of course, topical solutions, salves, and these more wellness formulas and tinctures and lotions, maybe a transdermal patch, versus, you know, if it's just an infused beverage or, of course, candies, gummies. Gummies are the big thing. So you want to come up with an initial product design first and make sure, you know, you pull from these different industries that we follow the standards from. Who best to implement these standards than people that have experience in them already? So pull from your food processing and food science people, oil and gas, believe it or not, because of distillation and understanding process flows, and engineers from different pharmaceutical manufacturing environments, nutraceutical, vitamins, all that kind of stuff, health and wellness. Of course, you mentioned botanical essential oil extraction. Of course, that would be for the extraction license, but you pull from these fields so that people can implement these standards for you, and not one person is going to have the answer to every single part of the production phase process, but you pull from these, and there's quite a bit of people with cannabis experience now too. So you can leverage that as well. Um, so what's next on the prompt? We have showing you have the experience of the personnel to fulfill these different processes.
Yeah. So on that note, Tyler, staffing, what are you looking for? Let's say I'm going through the application process and I'm kind of building my team. Again, I'm not an expert manufacturer, but I need to kind of demonstrate that my team will be. How do I vet people? What am I looking for in kind of maybe hiring an infusion team? What am I looking for? What
Yeah.
goals? What types of training? What types of certification should I be on the lookout
Very,
for?
yeah, very good. This brings us nicely into kind of some of the ISO, International Standards Organization, some of the ISO certifications and ASTM things that I wanted to talk about today as well. So for me personally, and not one of these experience or paths that I mentioned is the one that it has to be. There's plenty of other experiences out there, but I look for people with ISO 9001 experience, which is a quality management system that is a standard that's internationally recognized. And so, or equivalent. I usually say or equivalent because the standards that are found in the ISO 9001 are also found in other standards. ISO 22, it's a food safety. I have it here on my slide. ISO 22000, it's food safety management system. So a lot of these certifications have very similar requirements of, it has to do with defining your management team, defining the roles and responsibility, clearly stating your quality program or your food safety plan, all your sanitary practices that you have, and then also it has to do with your quality management system, your corrective action plan, your preventative action plan. And those are key terms and best management practices that you really want to hone in on is CAPA, corrective action, preventative action plan. And this is a common theme throughout these various quality management systems, food safety management systems. So you want to have confidence that you're hiring people and looking for people that can know their way through these quality management systems. Of document control is another big part of quality assurance and quality control. It's a key term that shows that you're establishing a controlled document for all your SOPs with proper printed dates, version control, and all of those things. And then the final really, really great ISO certification, if you can find people that know their way around ISO 17025. It's going to build your business and make it very strong. And there's two reasons why. It's talked about pretty commonly in the cannabis industry as the lab certification, right? So yeah, a testing facility, an independent testing facility, should be under ISO 17025 accreditation, and they should have a certificate. And to relay this back to best management practices for your facility, you should vet your lab and ask them for their ISO certification annually, every renewal. It's part of your quality management system. Part of your food safety program is to show that you have an improved not only supplier program, but improved laboratory testing program. And if the lab cannot come up with their ISO certification and give it to you, then that's kind of a yellow flag. It might be in the process of getting it. That's a little bit better of an answer. And then Dr. Tom, you might have a comment or a question. And then I just had the other part of 17025 that I wanted to mention.
Really quick, no, absolutely. for your quality control, you want to assure the reviewers that every step of the process is going to be perfect, even the testing lab, as Tyler kind of pointed out. So I'm going to go be a little bit more bolder than Tyler and say, if your lab, your testing lab cannot produce those ISO results on an annual process, that's a little bit bigger than a yellow flag. Because keep in mind all the scrutiny that we already go under as the part of the cannabis industry, right? We have to deal with more of those pressures. So for the sake of your application, I would include content that says you will only work with testing labs that are actually able to provide proper ISO certification on an annual basis. And they have, and that they have committed to taking any required actions or steps to continually maintain 100% full compliance with all of that and at no time fall out of compliance. So again, you want to include that you will hold your testing lab accountable. It's not just that you'll have the products tested, but as part of your quality control plan to ensure that your products are safe, you're going to be hawkeyeing the testing lab itself, making sure they are fully compliant. No excuses. So yeah, back to you, Tyler.
Great. Yeah, and so the last point that I wanted to make about ISO 17025 that can make your business competitive, you know, especially if you're doing extraction, in my opinion, is to show that you're setting some best management practices in line with the pharmaceutical manufacturing. And that is to have your extraction equipment, and now this is for cultivation license as of now for Illinois, to show that your extraction equipment and your post-processing equipment has been gone through what we call a qualification, design qualification, installation qualification, performance qualification, operation qualification. And what this is, it dovetails into what I was talking about. It's the other half of 17025, ISO 17025, that we don't talk about too much in the cannabis industry yet. And that is, it's ISO 17025 is the general requirements for the competence of testing and calibration laboratories. The other half is the calibration laboratories. And what that is that's a third-party company that comes out and performs those qualification services for you. And it creates, once again, the common theme is traceability. So you're showing, they've put together a whole document for you where, say, it's an autoclave or a cryogenic device. They're going to come, they're going to put thermocouples or whatever, thermometers throughout the different parts of this equipment. And they're going to make sure it holds that very specific temperature for a really long time. And to make a long story short, they're going to do an analysis of this at different stages of the process, and they're going to compile a binder for you and say, here is your qualification, your operation qualification binder. And so this is the other part of 17025 that has to do with your manufacturing process, that if you want to take it up a notch and be competitive and show that you're following more of a pharmaceutical format, you can show that you've gone through this qualification process for many components of your manufacturing process, and you have it all documented from an ISO 17025 accredited organization.
Gotcha. Thank you very much, Tyler. So are there any other things that we should be absolutely concerned about as we're trying to put together our application materials for the infusion application? We kind of covered, you know, the different phases of production. We talked about control. We talked about training. We even touched a little bit about record keeping. And of course, we've been diving into best management practices. Is there anything else that we should be aware of, Tyler?
Yeah, very good question. First and foremost, one of the things specifically for infusion is that you need to have someone that has the food safety certification for Illinois for managers. And you want to make sure that the people doing the manufacturing, your skilled workers, your workforce has the food handlers certification associated with Illinois as well. Those are the two main things I would make sure you definitely reference and tie into The different requirements for the infusion license are the Sanitation Preparation Act, I believe, Food Handlers Act. There's 3 of them underneath in the Illinois requirements. You want to reference those, and of course, specifically say who in your organization has the sanitation preparation certificate that's required. Yeah.
Thank you, Tyler. And so I'm glad you brought that up. So as you're going through as an applicant, creating all of your narratives and putting together your experience, one of the things you definitely want to point to is the qualifications and the certifications that any of your team members may already have, or that they may be in the process of obtaining, right? All of the certifications that Tyler just brought up, again, if your team doesn't have them, that doesn't mean they can't get them. They cannot start working toward them. They cannot start, there's no reason they can't start the certification process. So one of the things that we want to urge people to do is go ahead and have your team start preparing. Go ahead and get them the training that they need, the certification they need, everything that you can do to prepare your application, make it stronger by demonstrating experience. That's what you need to do to win. So again, thank you, Tyler, for helping us kind of cover staffing and training a little bit. Now, as we go through and we start actually creating our content, keep that in mind. There's certain experiences that the review board wants to see. They want to see cannabis-specific experience. They want to see manufacturing, infusion-specific experience, and they want to make sure that all of the certification and the proper training is in place. So as you're going through writing the biographical content for your application, try to avoid a lot of the fluff narrative, or the narrative that talks about your past or your history. Keep it nuts and bolts, keep it simple and straightforward. Really focus on your training, your qualification, and your certifications. Everything that you've done to ensure that your product is going to be perfectly safe. At the end of the day, that is what you're going to be reviewed on. What is your ability to produce a safe and consistent product? Correct, Tyler?
Yeah, correct. I believe even one prompt for infuser license particular does even mention commercial kitchen. So if the prompt says, what is your commercial kitchen experience? Answer, what is your commercial kitchen experience? And so forth with the other prompts. So try and find people that want to get involved with your business and your organization that have some of these different skills that we talked about, or equivalent is a key phrase I use. There's many different food certifications. There's many different pharmaceutical best management practices to follow. So make sure you do your due diligence to make sure that the best management practices that you are adopting do fit the bill, so to speak, and meet the requirements of the license type that you're going for.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tyler. And before we just kind of close it out, we're running out of time here. I just want to kind of circle it back around again to the application. As you guys are selecting your products, if you're kind of new to the industry, one of the things you want to try to avoid is what I call the kid in a candy store effect. There's so many different types of products right now that you can infuse, that you can distribute, make available. But what it comes down to is, what can you effectively do with your team and your skill set right now? So making a bunch of promises saying, hey, I'm going to offer these hundreds of different items, maybe that's not going to look good given the size and scale of your operation. So think about that. It's one thing to go ahead and fictionalize your brand at its peak versus starting out. So keep in mind that when you pick your products, you want to make sure that you're selecting products that can all be produced with the same set of equipment. One of the things that I've seen as a consultant is a lot of times people will pick an entire series of equipment, entire infusion setup, and then after they're done, they'll say, well, now we want to do this. Well, then you shouldn't have got that equipment, because doing that one extra product is going to require, another $500,000 worth of equipment right there. So strategize your product list accordingly. Start with your equipment, see what your equipment can do, and then pick from there. Or if you don't have your equipment, go backwards. Start with a list of the final products you want to have, and then figure out how all of those are made. And the products you want to start off with are the ones that share the same production process, the same equipment. If you can get an equipment setup that produces 10 items, that's awesome. Focus on those 10 products and then expand later. Don't make the mistake of purchasing and installing several different systems to build out or to infuse several products, none of which are going to matter if you can't sustain the business, or you've already lost too much of your capital by diversifying your equipment, right? So keep it simple, keep it simple to begin with, and then as you reach the limitation of your actual equipment, that's when you want to consider expanding your product catalog. When you've reached the limitation of your equipment, not before then, unless you've done this before and have business planning. But yeah, that's kind of what we have for you today. Tyler, do you have any last closing comments or anything else you'd like to share before we wrap everything up?
No, thanks everyone. And just reiterate what Dr. Tom said, a common best management practices in the design phase of a facility is to have a little bit of a floor space designated for future expansion. You don't know what it is, you don't have the equipment yet, you have a little bit of area designated for it for future expansion. And so with that, I'd say thanks for joining us today, and thank you, Green Rush Consulting.
Awesome, right? Thank you everyone for joining in for another episode of the GRC Application Accelerator webinar. Of course, we will be back next week, same time, same station. So we will speak to you then. Till then, please let us know if you have any questions or concerns, and we will do our best to make sure that we get you across that application finish line. Thank you.
Thank you.